Hello, I wanted to discuss the natural resources industry today, energy and mining, because it's just go on a little bit of a rant because I see an industry caught between a rock and a hard place. And by the way, it's very windy and I forgot to bring my windjammer, so sorry about that. If I do get a bit ranty or it gets a bit windy, I apologise. But this impossible situation, it sort of makes me get a bit frothy at the mouth because it's in large part so unnecessary. And it's not the making of the industry itself, but of idiotic policy. And we as investors need to understand, I suppose, the binds which businesses find themselves in. So here goes. And we're going to start with supply chains. They were disrupted first by COVID-19, or the reaction to it, then the Ukraine war, then more lockdowns in China. They're still not working as they should. And you don't need me to tell you that delays cost money. And if you imagine a workforce all ready to go, all being paid on the payroll, but they haven't got the right equipment to get started, and that means money's draining out on one side and nothing's coming in on the other. And it's very punishing where capital is tight, and boy, is it tight in mining. Then there's, as we all know, dramatic inflation in input costs, especially energy, but all equipment, wages as well. Budgets to production are going up and up. Money's also tight because of lack of investment. And this lack of investment takes many forms. First, there is underinvestment from outside. ESG, environmental, social and governance guidelines determine where fund managers can allocate capital, where they should. Oil, gas, mining, for obvious reasons, tend not to score well on ESG. So capital isn't allocated there, and the industry is starved of funds. That was a dog, by the way, it's out of camera. But what's so hypocritical is that ESG demands and the decarbonised future it wants require enormous amounts of the very products that its investment guidelines steer it away from. Metals, copper, tin, silver, lithium, cobalt, palladium, platinum, nickel, manganese, rare earths, the list goes on. They're all essential to a low-carbon future, but how are they to be produced without investment? Vast amounts of carbon have got to be burnt to achieve decarbonisation. Yet oil and gas have also suffered from lack of investment. It's one of the reasons prices are now so high, lack of new supply. Yet, instead, the companies involved are accused of ramping up the price and profiteering. The industry is itself wary of expansion too. There's lack of investment from within. The industry still has memories of 2013, 2014, when mining in particular, but energy too, had what Nicholas Snowden of Goldman Sachs calls a near-death experience. The collapse in the oil price decimated energy too. And this near-death experience followed the bonanza of the noughties, when it seemed that metals and energy prices could only go higher, driven first by China's seemingly insatiable appetite for natural resources, and then the money printing post-2008, during which the US exported incredible amounts of inflation. But those soaring prices suddenly came to a halt. Supply met demand, prices collapsed, and with them the oil, gas and mining industries. Many companies went under. People lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods, and in many cases, because those who work in mining and energy tend to have a habit of investing in that industry as well, a lot of them lost their investments as well. They went down the Swanee too. And as a result, there is what Snowden calls internalized trauma. And so the industry is now uber cautious. Nobody wants to be the stupid guy who blows fortunes on projects that prove uneconomic. So despite all the shortages in energy and metals we keep reading about, the industry is still cautious. And it's probably a sensible mental space to be in. Rising commodities prices, especially those of oil and gas, may be largely down to 10 years of underinvestment, yet still the industry is reluctant to go in all in. And can you blame it? Look at what's happening in markets across the board. We've got a spiralling US dollar, crashing bonds, crashing equities. Money is tightening. Even the UK housing market is starting to look a bit dodgy. And the next asset class that looks like it's puking is, despite everything, oil. And policymakers would actually welcome that. And I was listening to a debate on Bloomberg last week. I don't know why, I was cooking, and that's how I ended up listening to Bloomberg. I never watched Bloomberg, but it was someone from the US government and someone from the oil and gas industry. And one was demanding that oil companies reinvest their profits in the ground, in exploration, so that production can be increased and the load on the US consumer lightened. And the other was arguing that profit should be returned to investors in the form of dividends, as that's why they invested in the first place. And it's up to the companies what they do with the money, not the government. And then the person from the government basically said, if you don't reinvest your profits in the ground of your own accord, we're going to force you to do it by government mandate. And that's hardly going to entice further investment, is it? Sorry, it's very windy. And what if companies are forced to put their profits back in the ground and then the price of the underlying commodity collapses? You know, but that's what this industry is so terrified of. So it tries to find a balance between reinvestment and rewards to existing investors. Oh gosh, it's really windy, sorry. I'm going to try and put my hand over the microphone. And why should they reinvest capital when governments have said they want an end to fossil fuels? What's the point? And then there's the fact that you can't get the staff, and that's the talent issue. Few people desire the aggro of working in such difficult industries when you could go and work in tech and earn more. And the lack of talent leads to further delays. You can't get the people you need to build what you need until next year or whenever they're next available. And by the way, their fees are higher too. And let's say a company finally manages to navigate all of this and produce an essential commodity. With the high prices it's charging for that commodity, it's accused of profiteering, so a windfall tax is levied. And even the US is now talking about windfall taxes on oil and gas. By the way, windfall taxes will not make oil and gas cheaper for consumers. They'll just make companies even more reluctant to invest, and that leads to further supply shortages. No wonder talent and investment go elsewhere. And then there's permitting, another hurdle. If you look at the arguments in the UK about fracking, it's an obvious problem solver, but it's toxic. Any money put towards fracking is just going on legal bun fights, culture war and politics. Where's the return? Nuclear is another obvious solution to electricity problems, but look at the opposition, look at the regulation, look at the lead times, the build times for nuclear reactors. We'll all be 6 foot under by the time it's all done. Why risk capital in that? You're better off just buying the metal itself and stockpiling that in anticipation of higher prices. In many ways it's the equivalent of land banking. You buy uranium or you buy base metal ETFs or precious metal ETFs, but that just means yet more metal is kept off market and prices go higher still. Cheaper energy and metals would mean lower inflation, but regulation, permitting and the ensuing arguments only push costs up by delay and by process. Now I can see price collapses coming with this broader correction in equity markets. Commodities are looking very dodgy, and then investment dries up altogether. So it's even worse. But I can also see soaring prices and life getting very expensive for ordinary consumers. Capital preservation is everything. The natural resources industry is caught between a rock and a hard place. And unfortunately, that rather implies that the rest of us are too. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out my Substack letter. It's going great guns. Thanks. Please subscribe to this channel and I'll be back with another video very soon. Right now, I'm going to go and play tennis with that chap over there. Right, bye.